President Trump calls for Iran's unconditional surrender. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tells CBS Russia is helping Iran track U.S. movements, but tells us it's not a problem. Oil prices climb ever higher, gas prices follow in suit, and the U.S. job market sheds 92,000 jobs. We take a look at these signs of economic turbulence. You know it, and I know it. It has been a jarring week of war and a big primary set of outcomes in Texas. Conversations ahead with former Michigan Republican Congressman Peter Meijer and current Democratic Congresswoman Julie Johnson from Texas. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. Yes, back in Washington and in the conversation corner. Very good to be back in D.C. My thanks to everyone in New York who greeted me so warmly and made the show while we were there look so good. I will be with you tonight for the top of the show, but then I will take my leave because I am substitute anchoring the CBS Evening News tonight while that show's actual anchor, Tony Takeout, flies back from the Middle East and his week of war coverage there. Weijia Jiang will join me here at the end of this first block and then guide you quite ably, I'm sure, through the rest of our program tonight. I'm thankful to her for that. Wow, so many thanks to give out. Thanks in every direction. Anyway, today I interviewed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth for this Sunday's 60 Minutes. We talked about many aspects of the war in the Middle East, but we started with new reporting, CBS reporting, that Russia is providing intelligence to Iran so that it can track movements of U.S. military personnel. Here is part of that conversation.
Well, we're tracking everything. Our commanders are aware of everything. We have the best intelligence in the world. We're aware of who's talking to who, why they're talking to them, how accurate that information might be, how we factor that into our battle plans, our CENTCOM commander. So we know what's going on, and the president has an incredible knack at knowing how to mitigate those risks. And so the American people can rest assured their commander-in-chief is well aware of who's talking to who, and anything that shouldn't be happening, whether it's in public or back-channeled, is being confronted and confronted strongly.
The American people can therefore expect conversations with the Russians to stop this?
Well, President Trump, as people have seen, has a unique relationship with a lot of world leaders where he can get things done that other presidents, certainly Joe Biden, never could have. And through direct conversations or indirect, through him one-to-one or through his cabinet, messages definitely can be delivered.
Does this put U.S. personnel in any more danger than they otherwise would be?
Well,
the Russian involvement.
No one's putting us in danger. We're putting the other guys in danger. That's our job. So we're not concerned about that. We mitigate it as we need to. Our commanders factor all of this, but the only ones that need to be worried right now are Iranians that think they're going to live.
Moving around our Takeout studio apartment, we begin with newly named, I'm very happy to say that, CBS News national security analyst Aaron McLean, been on the program before. So we're at the touchscreen, but you just heard the defense secretary say, yes, we're aware of Russian efforts to assist the Iranians on positioning the U.S. military assets. It's not a problem. We know all about it. How do you evaluate that answer and this Russian involvement?
Well, it's a very serious development, Major. The Russians, through their 4 years of war in Ukraine right now, have developed a very sophisticated apparatus of scanning through all the data collected by all the sensors out there and figuring out how to target individuals through that. So if they are supplying that kind of information to the Iranians, it's a concern. I take the Secretary of War at his word that our people are aware of that they are tracking that. But anything like that has to be taken extremely seriously.
So when you hear that, you do think to yourself, there is a higher risk profile now that we know this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anytime you have a major power adversary like Russia coming in to assist the Iranians, that's a concern. The Russians, even though their progress has been halting in Ukraine over the years, have real capabilities and real capabilities on the targeting front as well.
So let's talk about the touchscreen. There's been a lot of conversation about interceptors. Help my audience understand why they're important, where they're important, and what else we should know.
So the United States military throughout the region, to include critically on this line of bases here that we have stretching from the northern part of Iraq through Kuwait, down through Qatar, Saudi Arabia, into the UAE and beyond, is protected by a multi-layered shield of air defenses. This is there because Iran, of course, has substantial ballistic missile and drone capabilities to strike our bases, but also civilian targets throughout the region. The issue that we faced at the start of this conflict was that the interceptors are very expensive. Now, Iranian ballistic missiles are also expensive, but the drones are very cheap. So there's a math problem when you're firing these very expensive interceptors at relatively cheap munitions. There's also just a quantity problem. Our reservoirs of these things, our magazines, are not infinitely deep. However, sitting here about 7 days into the start of this campaign, we actually seem to be winning the fight in the sense that we're not just, the United States military and its partners in the region are not just sitting there passively firing interceptors as missiles come in, but the United States military is also targeting the archers. Shooting the arrows down, if you'll permit the metaphor, in midair, expensive, at times risky. Going after the launchers, going after the missile storage sites in Iran, more straightforward. And over time, that's our doctrine, to hammer the archers. You see, as of yesterday afternoon, ballistic missile attacks from Saturday through Thursday down 90%, drone attacks down 80%.
And the secretary told me that that tempo is going to increase because he said there is now supremacy over the skies of Iran. The Israeli Air Force and the American Air Force can go wherever it wants and can target more precisely from overhead as opposed from, let's say, the Med or someplace around here. Point one. Point two, he said the personnel here have enough interceptors. Our allies will have enough interceptors for not just bases, but the infrastructure, the oil infrastructure in that area.
That's right. It's holding for now. Now, you do see some of our allies and partners in the region getting nervous.
Yes.
These reserves of interceptors are not infinite. It was very interesting to see in the last day or so the development of the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, offering support to partners in the region because who has experience shooting down Iranian drones? Ukraine has experience shooting down.
Because they were there.
Drones. That's right. Iran supplies these drones to Russia, who fires them at Ukraine. Ukraine has very limited interceptors for a variety of complicated, largely political reasons. And so they've become very good at shooting down drones with drones, developing tactics to make the most out of the limited resources that they have. And they're now going to advise our partners in the region and us.
What should we watch for in the next 48 to 72 hours?
Yeah, so I want to tell you a story, Major, about what's kind of a tale of two wars here. We have this graphic here showing essentially the locations of major strikes that the United States and Israel have made in Iran, targeting naval targets here along the coast, missile targets here in the western mountain range of the country, one attack on a nuclear site in the center of the country, and obviously we've all heard about the regime targets here around Tehran. And then you have Iranian counterstrikes all the way across the region here, U.S. bases, diplomatic facilities, obviously hammering Israel, and then there's a whole sub-theater war going on between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. It's a lot, but it really, even though the graphic makes it look as though essentially, you know, we're hitting them a lot and they're hitting us a lot, the reality is it's two very different approaches. What you see over here is a relentless campaign targeting missiles, targeting the Iranian Navy, and targeting, to a limited extent so far at least, their nuclear program, also regime targets. Every time we hit these targets, the balance of power shifts slightly in favor of the U.S.-Israeli coalition. The Iranian strikes, on the other hand, though you do see hits slipping through. We had the tragic loss of six service members in Kuwait. You see some harrowing footage of radar facilities being taken down in Bahrain, a few other things like that. There's a degree of indiscriminateness to the Iranian targeting. There's a lot of civilian targets, civilian airports, hotels, things like that. It's designed essentially to harass, to cause alarm, to cause our allies to pressure us, to bring things to a close. But militarily, the impact is much more limited on the U.S.-Israel coalition through those kinds of strikes than the impact is on Iran through the sorts of strikes the coalition is running in Iran. The balance of power every day shifts in favor of the United States and Israel.
How much do we know, Aaron, about how many munitions, either drone or missile or underground, in Iran that they could pull up and add to their stockpiles above ground?
The drones are very substantial. They have a lot of drones. They're cheap. They're cheap to make. So it's you know, the numbers are not public, but it's very substantial. The ballistic missiles, there were a lot at the start of the conflict of short-range ballistic missiles concentrated here in the western part of the country that have the range to target this other side of the Persian Gulf, also potentially naval targets out at sea. But those stocks are dropping as, again, it's not so much that we're shooting them down all out of the sky. It's that we're going after the facilities in Iran, taking them out in storage, taking out their launchers, taking out the personnel parked in the parking lot who are going to go operate them that day, essentially dismantling the system that fires them. That seems to be having real effects.
One last question, because I've been doing a fair amount of reading about this Strait of Hormuz, and I've read that there are gun emplacements in the hills and that there are rapid movement boats that the Iranians have to harass or attack oil-carrying vessels. Evaluate that potential risk.
Yeah, in the long run, Major, I would say this is one of the more significant questions of the war is the Strait of Hormuz, through which an enormous proportion of the world's energy traffic flows, going to be open? Right now, though there are ships going through, it is de facto closed simply because the carriers naturally feel the risk of sailing through a space like this when there's a hot war, even though, for example, we've not yet seen the Strait mined, which would be a significant Iranian capability, which they have. If you block this situation right here with mines, once those mines are in, they're very hard to get back out. It can be done. We've done it before. We did it in the 1980s. We could do it in 2026. But it's ideally the situation that you prevent them from going in the first place. I wouldn't want to be the Iranians tasked with pulling something like that off or tasked with shooting at ships from shore, because our Navy is watching and our Navy has substantial capabilities too. If I may, I think the longer run challenge is, if hostilities continue, can the carriers be persuaded to carry the energy resources through the strait, even if it's not mined or physically blocked? I think that's the big challenge.
And there's a big insurance question hanging over all that. Outstanding stuff, Aaron. So great to have you.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. I'm joined now by Aaron David Miller. He is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, a friend of the show. Aaron, I'm always glad to have your perspective. You've written this week that this is a representation within the administration and those tasked to negotiate with the Iranians, from your vantage point, a failure of diplomacy. Walk me through that.
It was a broader issue. Thanks for having me, Major. Look, the president's deployed his son-in-law and his best friend to negotiate the three of the most complicated conflicts in the international system. Russia-Ukraine, number one, Israel-Gaza, number two. And then presumably until determination by the administration that negotiations were not going to work, to negotiate with the Iranians. It's really difficult. The last time anyone pulled off a trifecta like that was 71 and 73, when Kissinger extricated the U.S. from Vietnam War, the Paris Peace Accords, opened China with Richard Nixon, and negotiated 3 disengagement agreements following the October Arab-Israeli war. The administration doesn't have that kind of bandwidth. And I think we find ourselves in a situation in which Russia-Ukraine negotiations are not just stalled, they're failing. Reports today on the Russians actually providing real-time intelligence to the Iranians about U.S. deployments and ops is a huge problem. And Donald Trump, who has tremendous influence over Putin, who has failed to criticize him once since his operation began, ought to call in that shit almost immediately. So look, these are hard issues, and you can invite two of the best negotiators I know, the late Henry Kissinger and my former boss, James Baker, down here, and he'd struggle with him as well.
So when the president posts, as he did this morning, Aaron, David Miller, that only unconditional surrender from Iran will be the acceptable end of this war, what do you think that means? What do you think that looks like? And do you think that is, based on what we know now, achievable?
Yeah, the problem is 2 hours later, he qualified that to Barak Ravid, to Axios, by basically saying, what I really meant to say was that we need to destroy the Iranian military. There was no talk of surrender. Look, I think the administration, president in particular, since he's calling the shots, no doubt about that, toggles back and forth between the avowed objectives to basically completely undermine Iran's capacity to project its power beyond its borders and to damage the internal instruments of state repression on one hand, with on the other, trying to get an outcome that he can actually claim was transformative. That is to say, find another regime, a Delcy Rodriguez in Iran, do a Venezuela, something that will tell the world that the Iranian polity is not only going to do this for the next year, because we so retarded his capacity, it's not going to do it again. And that is a much, much tougher lift.
Aaron David Miller, I want to ask you one other question I put to the Secretary, Pete Hegseth. I said, what about the Kurds? You know they're massing on the border, meaning in northern Iraq, the Iranian border, and they want to go in. He said, we're aware of that. I said, would we cooperate? He said, I'm not going to discuss that. He said, but we haven't coordinated. We haven't done anything. He was trying to be not dismissive, but certainly he did not want to lean in to something that would sound encouraging to them from his position as Secretary of Defense. Walk my audience through the importance of the Kurd question here.
Well, what, 10% of the Iranian population of 90+ million are Kurds. They have capacity, there's no doubt about it. but I'm not sure any externally backed insurrection by a minority, and the Kurds certainly have a right to participate, Kurdish Iranians, in the self-determination of the Iranian public. But it's unclear to me how significant a factor CIA or Israeli or even American-backed support for an insurgency along the border would be. If it got serious, it might be a distraction for the IRGC, another headache, something for them to worry about. But it also risks, of course, two things. Number one, the moral hazard of encouraging the Kurds yet again, as we've done in Syria, only basically to tell the Kurds, well, tell FLUC, the central government of Syria is going to forcibly or not integrate you into the state. And again, in the wake of the Iraq war. And there's a Turkish factor here, too. If Iran truly is hollowed out, the new regional the new regional power, other than the Israelis, is Turkey. And that presents significant problems for key Arab states and for the Israelis. Let's see where we are a week from now.
Understood. Aaron David Miller, always appreciate your time and perspective. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Major.
CBS News senior White House correspondent and Helmer of the show going forward, Weijia Jiang joins me now.
Taking the
You're
helm
taking the helm. Take it confidently, Weijia. Talk me through today's busy day at the White House.
Well, the president just wrapped up a roundtable for sports. He had many executives there, and obviously, you know, this is something that he has been wanting to showcase. But I think, Major, the most important meeting at the White House today was with the CEOs of several defense companies. And the president did post about it with a little bit of a readout, saying that they agreed to quadruple the amount of the highest class of weaponry. And that is really important because obviously, as you and Aaron just talked about, there is a finite amount of weapons, especially as it relates to intercepting Iranian missiles that are dwindling fast. In fact, Arab nations are saying, we need more and we need your help. So the president, without offering a timeline, without offering exactly how many more are going to be produced, says that these companies have agreed to do it. Now, remember, earlier he also said, we have enough already to go on forever.
That is the administration messaging point, because when I asked the defense secretary about that, he said, yes, we have enough for ourselves and to backfill our allies in the region if they so request. Right now. And the White House went to great pains today to say this is a long scheduled meeting. Yes. It's not being rapidly put together because there's a crunch.
Correct.
But this is something we will obviously keep a watchful eye on.
Yes, and they already have another meeting scheduled for 2 months from now. But you're right. They wanted to point out that this is not in response to the war in Iran. It was always on the books for several weeks.
Weijia, thanks for hanging out with me in the Conversation Corner. I now bequeath the show, the rest of it today, to you and your capable hands.
Thank you. And we will be watching your show tonight.
CBS Evening News. I got to go run and do that.
All
right. See everybody.
Still to come, the unexpected setback for the labor market. Kelly O'Grady joins me next to discuss February's jobs report and rocky week on Wall Street. Also, Texas Democratic Congresswoman Julie Johnson is facing a tough primary runoff contest against Colin Allred. She joins me live to talk about the state of the race. Plus, former Michigan Republican Congresswoman and Iraq War veteran Peter Mayer joins us for his analysis of the state of the war with Iran. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. New jobs data from February shows unexpected setback for the labor market. The U.S. lost 92,000 jobs in February. Some economists had been predicting a gain of 60,000 jobs. The unemployment rate rose slightly to 4.4%. Kelly O'Grady joins us now to break all of these numbers down. Kelly, great to see you. What do you think was behind this drop-off?
So specifically in February, Regis, I kind of want to add an asterisk to the drop because we had all of that bad weather, the blizzards. We saw a pretty significant drop in the leisure and hospitality sector because of that. 27,000 jobs were lost. And then also in healthcare, normally a big driver of job growth in the U.S., dropped 28,000. And that was because of a strike and one of the biggest healthcare firms in the country, Kaiser Permanente. So that's not something that you're going to see every single month. That being said, there were also revisions to the December numbers. We had thought we added jobs in the month of December, but we actually lost jobs. So you sort of zoom out, and 3 of the last 5 months, you saw a job loss. So we've talked about this slow to hire, slow to fire job market. I talked to a couple of folks today that they're saying, well, maybe we're kind of moving towards a slow to no hire job market, but we haven't seen mass firing. So that 4.4% unemployment number that you see on your screen right now, that is still in the healthy range. It's at the upper band, but definitely not something that you want to see. This is a slow growth job market, no growth this month. And I think the next couple of months are going to be really critical as people are, especially for the Fed, as they're thinking about growth.
And Kelly, since the start of the Iran war, crude oil prices are up about 35%. The stock market has fallen. Should we expect this to continue as the war goes on? And tell me what that means for me, for people at home, especially as they go to the gas pump, which is, I think, what everyone is thinking about right now.
Absolutely, right? Every $10 increase in a barrel of oil translates to 25 cents at the gas pump. And what I would say is fill up your gas tank right now, because we are seeing oil continue to go up. And actually, U.S. crude just passed $91 in the past hour. And so that is, we're certainly not where we were summer of 2022 when we had the record high gas prices of $5. But if we continue to see this go up, which you would expect as the conflict goes on, and we haven't really seemed to nail down what, naval escort and insurance means for the Strait of Hormuz. We also have production shutting down in a number of different countries. It takes a while for it to restart, even if things do calm down. So I don't want people to full on panic. But if you can fill up your gas tank now, it's likely a good idea, because you're going to see gas prices go up at least a little bit over the next couple of weeks.
And what about the price of other things? What do you see as the long-term impact of this war on inflation and on whether it will slow down growth here in the U.S.?
So this is the interesting tension, right? We just talked about slowing growth in the job market, but because we have rising energy prices, that often is a red flag that you're going to see rising inflation. Again, I mentioned summer of 2022. That's when we hit the 9% inflation that was partially driven by oil prices and gas prices. So when you have your diesel, right? Your diesel prices, because of oil prices going up, that's what trucks run on. You have your airfares going up. This is a knock-on effect that we're going to see. But again, that does take a while. This is not going to happen overnight. So let's see how long this war in Iran lasts before we make those long-term predictions.
Okay, Kelly O'Grady, thank you for making sense of all of that for us. Appreciate it. Democrats are still duking it out in Texas. We'll speak with Congresswoman Julie Johnson about her primary runoff against Colin Allred. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. The life and legacy of civil rights leader Reverend Jesse Jackson was celebrated this afternoon at the House of Hope in Chicago. Former Presidents Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, and former Vice President Kamala Harris were among those who eulogized Jackson. Here's some of what they said.
It was because of that path that he had laid, because of his courage, his audacity, that 2 decades later, a young black senator from Chicago's South Side would even be taken seriously as a candidate for the presidential nomination.
I know he was determined and tenacious. I know he was underrated, undeterred, and unafraid. Not a joke. And more than most, Jesse was dedicated with every fiber in his being to redeeming the soul of America.
He was faithful to the scripture which said, we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But unlike a lot of people in politics, he didn't go around looking down his nose at other people. He hated the sin and not the sinner. He was always trying to lift people up.
He gave us the language, the rainbow, to understand, as has been said, the beauty that comes after the storm, when we see what is possible and what can be unburdened by what has been. As he once said, when a barrier falls for one of the locked out, it opens the doors for all.
Thousands of people were in attendance both inside and outside the church. Jackson died last month at 84 years old due to a neurodegenerative condition. Now, many of Tuesday's primary races in Texas have now advanced to a runoff. One of those is the Democratic race for the 33rd Congressional District, featuring Colin Allred versus incumbent Julie Johnson. Allred originally ran for Senate, but dropped out after Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett entered the race. Congresswoman Julie Johnson joins us right now. Congresswoman, thank you for making time for us today.
Absolutely. It's so great to be with you again.
Well, I just want to start with how you're feeling about the race. How do you think you're going to do?
Oh, I feel great. We really outperformed in this race against a candidate who had a 90% name ID. We knocked on tens of thousands of doors and forced a runoff against a candidate who spent over $100 million in the state of Texas over the last 2 election cycles, and he could not even get a majority of the vote. So we're feeling really good about where we are in the runoff. Our voters and our supporters are strong, they're determined, and we're looking forward to bringing it home at the end of May.
Well, I want to play some of what Colin Allred said about you on election night because I want to give you a chance to respond. So here's what he said.
For 6 years, I never traded a single stock while I was in Congress because I thought that it was unethical. And I think it is, and it's something we should make illegal. I rely on individuals to support my campaigns. I don't take a dime of corporate PAC money. Julie Johnson has made a very different decision. She's one of the top stock traders in the country and received hundreds of thousands of dollars in PAC money.
Congresswoman, I know you've addressed this criticism before, in fact, right here on this show, but because Allred just made those remarks this week, what is your response?
Right. He knows that those attacks are not true and they're not accurate. And he does that. He launches false attacks. He lies over and over again because he doesn't have a record of his own to run on. All he can run on is attacking me falsely because he doesn't have anything positive to say about himself, which is really unfortunate. I've run a campaign on issues that have affected the people of this district: housing, affordability, pushing back on ICE. He voted to enable ICE. He didn't do anything on affordability. He didn't do anything on health care. And I've addressed all of those issues, which is why I can run on a record, why all he can do is run on tearing down another Democrat falsely.
And Congresswoman, I want to turn to another high-stakes race in your state because President Trump says he will endorse either John Cornyn or Ken Paxton soon to face James Tallarico for the Senate seat in Texas. Now, Democrats are excited, I know you are, about the prospect of turning that seat blue. But I want to get your reaction to what one Democratic advisor said in a Politico article. He said, we have to be practical about how we use our resources. You need a perfect storm to kill a white whale. And if it's going to be Cornyn in the general election, then it's not a perfect storm. Do you agree with that?
I disagree with that because, what you're seeing is, just look at our primary, right? Most people thought about 30,000 people would come out and turn out and vote in our primary. Almost 72,000 people turned out. It was an incredible turnout, and we saw that across the state. John Cornyn is complicit with what Donald Trump is doing, with what Republicans are doing. He hasn't done one thing to stand up against ICE, to put back constitutional norms, to put back the power of Congress to declare war, all of these other things that people are so frustrated with. John Cornyn has just been a lapdog for Donald Trump, just like Ken Paxton. So either way, I think Democrats and people are fed up with what Congress is doing, fed up with this administration, and the way they're showing that anger is at the ballot box. And I think in James Tallarico and in Gina Hinojosa going against Greg Abbott, we have some excellent candidates at the top of our ticket who provide clear articulation as to the members of what the Democrats stand for. And when I win this runoff, I'll be right there with them in November advocating for the District 33 folks as well.
And I want to ask you about another colleague in Texas, Republican Tony Gonzalez, who has dropped his reelection bid after admitting to having an affair with a staffer who later died by suicide. He still says he's staying in office, though. Do you think there's anything that could change that?
I think he's going to serve out the remainder of his term, which I think he should resign immediately. I think his conduct is gross, it's disgusting, and it does not befit a member of Congress. And I think he should actually be kicked out of the body. But I think it's being referred to the Ethics Committee. We'll see what they do. But I'm glad he chose to step down and not run for re-election. But his conduct is absolutely shameful and it is not befitting a member of Congress at all.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I want to ask you, too, about your reaction to Kristi Noem's, should I say, reassignment. The House has passed a DHS funding bill, but it is dead in the Senate. Do you think there's a better chance for Congress to reach an agreement on DHS funding now that she is out, or on her way out, I should say?
Well, we'll see. I mean, Kristi Noem was a terrible secretary. You know, I've called for her impeachment multiple occasions over the year as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, but it's also the conduct of the agency. I think we have to see a whole-scale revamping of what the mission and purpose of this agency is. We have to see a complete stoppage of these roaming patrols that are just terrorizing people solely based on racial profiling, abusing the constitutional protections, and just ignoring the rights of the people in this country. And unless we see a wholesale commitment to withdraw from all of that, I don't see anything changing. If this new person is going to step in and keep business as usual, then it doesn't really matter. So we're going to have some real honest conversations at the family table about what this agency does, what its purpose is going forward, and how it can be completely restructured, because what it's doing right now is completely unacceptable.
All right, Congresswoman Julie Johnson, thank you for being so gracious with your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Well, next, I'm joined by former Michigan Republican Congressman and Iraq War veteran Peter Meyer to assess the state of the war in Iran. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. We are following the latest developments on the escalating war with Iran as sources tell CBS News that Russia is providing Iran with intelligence about the United States military. Former Michigan Republican Congressman Peter Meyer joins me now. He is also an Iraq war veteran. Congressman, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. I want to start with something that the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said on Wednesday when he was asked what is his message for China and Russia, both of which have obviously been condemning this war. Here's what he said.
I don't have a message for them, and they're not really a factor here. And our issue is not with them. It's with the nuclear ambitions of Iran.
Congressman, do you agree with the Secretary that they're not really a factor here?
I mean, I think it's important, and Secretary Hegseth said this clearly, to not try to involve China and Russia in this war, to try to isolate and eliminate the threat that Iran poses by itself. Part of the reason why we are focused on Iran and why Iran is so dangerous is obviously the ballistic missiles, obviously the threat of them attaining a nuclear weapon, but also in the potential for a future conflict for them to be on the side of Russia and China. Removing them from the chessboard the same way that we did with Venezuela, ensuring that they cannot laterally escalate any threat or any conflict that may occur in the Pacific. You know, that is important. So I think it's strong and sensible for the Secretary of Defense to say that. Now, at the same time, the fact you're removing a piece from their chessboard means that China is concerned, means that Russia not only sees this as weakening their alliance, weakening their allies, but also an opportunity to mire the U.S. in the same type of challenge and conflict that Russia has found itself in Ukraine. So we should separate these in terms of our tactical objectives, but there is certainly a strong strategic undercurrent.
And can you help our viewers understand what it means that Russia is sharing intelligence with Iran? How could that help Iran in this war?
Oh, it clearly gives Iran capabilities and a sophistication of intelligence that they lack. Iran is not an unsophisticated adversary. I mean, you have seen that in their ability to deploy weaponry, to even spread chaos throughout the region, up to and including the arrest of Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps cells in Azerbaijan, in the United Kingdom, and in Bahrain. That have just occurred in the past 24 hours. But Iran does not have access to the type of satellite capability. They don't have access to the type of signals intelligence capability that Russia can bring to bear. And so obviously that is something that we should be taking very seriously, that we should be countering, and that we should be pushing back with vigorously, while at the same time maintaining that distinction that we do not want to mix these streams. We do not want to get to the point where Russia is tempted to be supporting the Iranians in a more overt and concrete way.
And Congressman, you've also warned that this war puts us at risk here on American soil. Why?
This was always the fallback plan for the regime. Number one was to sow chaos in the region if they were threatened, and we have seen that. Number two was to try to attack U.S. and Western targets outside of the region. We have not necessarily seen that yet. Obviously, you had the tragic shooting in Austin. Whether that was sympathetic or actually directed has not been established. But the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and their intelligence assets, they have cased locations within the United States for potential attack. They have a track record of attacking Western and specifically Israeli targets in the past. And one of their alleged operatives is on trial right now, today, for the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. So this is certainly a threat that should be taken seriously. It's something that I think our FBI and our joint terrorism task forces are well aware of. But if ever there is a moment where if you see something, you should be saying something, it's today.
And speaking of that regime, the president says he wants to have a role in picking the nation's next leader. How do you assess that?
This is part of the administration's strategy of decapitate and delegate. Obviously, Venezuela was the clearest example of that, and we've learned from the regime change wars of the past, especially the de-Baathification and the disbanding of the Iraqi military after the 2003 invasion. That causes chaos. You want to try to work with the power structures that are in play. And obviously, we are the dominant military power in that region. The Trump administration is taking this initiative, and this is another way of asserting that we will not just return back to to the status quo that we had just 1 week ago, but that this is time for a new direction for the country of Iran.
And President Trump has made that point very clear. Thank you so much, former Congressman Peter Meijer, for your time today.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, Kristi Noem may be out as Homeland Security Secretary, and Democrats hope that's just the start. Our political panel will talk about which high-profile Trump appointee could be on the way out next. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. President Trump's firing of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem might not be enough for some Democrats. Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal is pushing for a perjury investigation, saying Noem may have lied under oath during a Senate hearing on Tuesday. Let's bring in our political panel to discuss: Republican strategist Aaron McGuire and Democratic strategist John McCarthy. It's so great to have you both.
Hey, happy Friday.
So, Aaron, I want to start there with Kristi Noem, because administration sources tell us at the White House that there was just too much drama surrounding Noem, and she had to go because it was overshadowing the president's agenda. But you just heard what Senator Blumenthal said. Do you think that Republicans have a fresh start here, or that this will continue to follow them?
Well, I think there will be some repercussions from the Noem era at the Department of Homeland Security, and I think that there are a number of ways that could be looked at. It could be looked at the $220 million ad campaign that is now under immense scrutiny. It could be her leadership and the kind of internal politics we had been hearing about as well, plus the optics of the enforcement measures from them as well. I think all of that together, there's going to be a lot that comes from it. But Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, who has been put up for the position, is well liked across the Hill. And while Democrats will continue to want to see reforms, there is a better shot with Mark Wayne being able, as the senator, to step forward and say, you know me as a member, you know me as a colleague and a friend. Here are the reforms I can bring without having to sign anything hard and fast. So I don't think it's a complete restart, but I do think they're on a better footing because already senators do really respect Senator Mullen.
And John, Leader Hakeem Jeffries name-checked Pam Bondi yesterday as another cabinet member who should be on the way out. But we know that President Trump has a lot of faith in her, and they work very closely together. So do you think that that's a smart use of messaging? And will it resonate?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that President Trump tends to stay loyal for very long. I mean, I think at any given day, the president might like you, and that could change pretty quickly. I think that was certainly the story for Secretary Noem. But one of the important things here, I think, is you're really just kind of changing window dressing at a certain point. The policies that are being played out now in the streets are what's incredibly unpopular. So changing the secretary, I don't think really is going to do that much. Yesterday, we saw a poll out of Fox News that even said that 50% of voters think that funding to ICE should be scaled down. 76% of Democratic voters, something like 60% of even Republican voters at this point, are saying that what they're seeing in the streets at places of worship, people going into people's homes without warrants, is really troubling to people. So I don't know that changing the secretary, no matter how much the incoming secretary is respected, is really going to change the politics of this too much.
And speaking of the president's loyalties and his whims, he hasn't endorsed yet in that Senate race in Texas. And I wonder why you think that is, because it seems that every day that the Republicans have a clear candidate to get behind is another day to build a case against the Democrats.
That's very true, but President Trump has a number of pressure points based in this race. One, you're looking at Senator Cornyn, who has the institution around him. He has his fellow senators. He has the Senate Leadership Fund and the National Republican Senatorial Committee pouring millions and millions of dollars into this race on his behalf. And then you have Ken Paxton, who stood with the president and was one of the only few electeds who stood with him after January 6th, and was one of the few electeds with him when he announced his reelection campaign for the 24th cycle. So the president, for all of his whims and loyalties sometimes, has remained very loyal to Ken Paxton, and he, in return, has remained loyal to the president. This is one that I don't see changing. I see those two pressure points really being the toughest parts for the president right now, and the pressure is clearly ramping up on the president.
Yes, well, our reporting is that he is likely to endorse Cornyn. And if that is the case, how do you feel about James Tallarico going up against him?
I mean, I think that James Tallarico is a great candidate no matter who he runs against. I think for the new kind of Democratic Party, primaries are a good thing. We're strengthened by this. I think that Tallarico comes out of that primary contest a much stronger candidate. I think Congressman Crockett is going to be supportive of his campaign. I think the Democratic Party in Texas is stronger because of this. So I'm not as concerned about who's on the other side, because I actually think that the brand that Tallarico has put forward is a strong one for the Democratic Party.
I just want to fast forward a little bit to 2028, because it's going to be here before we know it. Before we know it, we keep saying that, but it's true. So former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, she posted her support for Tucker Carlson in a presidential run after Trump said Carlson has lost his way. And Greene says Carlson beat Trump if he tried to violate the Constitution and run for a third term. What does that tell you about how Greene is trying to position herself and about this wing that is clearly forming?
Well, it's clear Marjorie Taylor Greene is going nowhere in the public sphere. Even though she's not an elected member anymore, she's clearly going to stay engaged at the front of an America First political operation. But she is out there saying that, you're not MAGA anymore, and defining what's MAGA. The only person who defines what the Make America Great Again movement is President Trump. That is his movement. And what he says it is at the moment, that's what it is. And if that's a little bit of whiplash for folks, they've kind of gotten used to it over the last decade. So she is going to be going into headwinds, even if she's trying to turn against the president now, right? We all know she's already kind of stepped away from him, but to try and take his base from him, that is a step I think that the president will eventually have to step in and squash.
And John, what do you think? I know a lot can happen between now and then, but does this other wing that's not MAGA have a role in?
I mean, to me, one of the best forces that you can predict on is that politicians are ambitious people, right? And I think it's nice to sit and say that the president's space is what the president's space decides it's going to be. But the reality is Donald Trump is a lame duck president. And ambitious politicians who want to be the future of any political party are going to try and kind of find their own lane on any of this. And I think that a lot of people who, might still have a couple of decades of service left ahead of them are looking at this and saying it's not going to age well.
John McCarthy, Aaron McGuire, thank you so much for your time. Well, that does it for the Takeout today. I'm Weijia Jiang in for Major Garrett. He will be back on Monday. The Daily Report is coming up next.